So we have noticed that in the last, probably if you're doing last 10 years past papers, you've realized that it started from the very basics of the implant questions, probably somewhere where there was not enough room between the implant and the adjacent teeth, and it was just a tight crown, where the management was as simple as, adjusting the proximal contacts to seat the crown. So those were the initial, questions of implants, and then the concepts keep getting evolved, and the implant maintenance questions took the major seat in the ADC examination, and then the TG was launched, the newer TG, the 2019, the third edition, and which added the peri-implantitis, peri-mucositis topic as well. So the major shift happened in ADC towards the maintenance, towards the peri-implant health. There are a lot of Odell cases also that we did, which helped us tackle those questions till that point. Now, in the recent examination, the trend has been increasing where even the peri-implant situations, but they were getting more complex rather than the straightforward peri-implantitis or mucositis, where lack of osteointegration, or more than that, the overgrowth of gingiva around the the abutments, especially in the overdenture case that we saw. So all the complex situations and the complex cases are getting added to the ADC examination. We have all noticed that trend, right? So from starting from very basic situations of implants, and now towards the maintenance of the implant, but in complex situations as well. Then other pattern and other trend that you may have noticed, and you may also be intrigued by, is the fact that case selections and where a particular implant may be given, or where it cannot be given. The complications if you give implant in those particular situations is also getting asked in the exam. Is that correct? The medical history is given to you, and you getting asked about that, whether what would be the complications, what would be the challenge, would you go ahead, would you recommend implant or not in these patients, what should be or what could be a challenge. Is that correct? Now, especially in your medical conditions, and in your basically aged patients who are in residential facilities, or maybe they are at home but they might have dementia, Alzheimer's, etc. Is that right? Am I making myself fully clear? Am I setting the background and setting the foundation here right for you all to understand what are we expecting, so that we can actually prepare around those parameters, right? So so the understanding is that case selection is coming, maintenance is coming, complications are coming, but in between, most importantly, is whether you would give implant in a particular patient or not. Would you even recommend giving implants in them or not? Right? So those are the basic areas, because surgical component is not getting asked. That's a specialized branch. And then again, the prosthodontic element to a little bit extent is getting asked, but not completely, because that again comes under the specialization. Prosthodontist might have to handle it. So the surgical component and the prosthodontic component, these are the two most important components of giving an implant. So the surgical component and the prosthodontic component, the designing is not getting asked. What kind of abutment exactly you would choose, these are not getting asked. But maintaining the maintenance, the periodontal health, the peri-implantitis and peri-mucositis, and the case selection, that comes under the expertise of general dentistry also. Because again, in Australia, it would be you who would be seeing and identifying the patient, probably deciding and recommending implants to the patient, then recommending and sending them to the specialist to get the implants done. So you are the most important point of contact between a patient and a specialist to even start implants. So case selection definitely falls under your kitty. And after that, after the implant surgery has been done, the prosthodontic phase has been completed, the maintenance phase also comes and falls directly under your umbrella. So you do understand that identifying the complications, making sure the maintenance is getting happen, and initial stage of case selection, They all are under your umbrella. And that's why this exam is targeting these two areas most importantly: the complications, the case selections, and implant health maintenance. Is that crystal clear for everybody? What areas, and then surgical phase and the prosthodontic phase, we are not to be worried about. But so you need to know the case selection, and because maintenance is coming under your expertise, you need to know about what kind of abutment the patient has, so that each abutment has a challenge in terms of the complications, whether it's be aesthetics, whether it be function, whether it be in aid to help in implant maintenance, hygiene maintenance. Is that correct? So one understanding that you require is to understand the implant abutments and its types, at least in exam, to address different kinds of terminologies if they come. You should have the basic understanding of the abutment. Is that correct? Because restoration part is a crown part, right? That can be either screw retained or you're cemented. Implant body fixture, of course, you're not doing the surgical part, so not those questions are not coming. But abutment part has an important role in the maintenance of hygiene. Is it or is it not? Abutment component has an important role in implant maintenance, hygiene maintenance, and that's why that's one area which you must be completely aware about. So I have various articles to target all these three major areas. If you're talking about three major areas, one is your case selection, second is your maintenance and hygiene and complications, and the third one is your abutment understanding. Today, I'm going to start with the abutment understanding. I'm going to talk about one article which will brief you about what kinds of abutments you have and what guides you, what kind of abutment can be chosen. Because you may get in the exam, if one abutment is not working and giving you complications based on the oral hygiene maintenance, then what substitute you may advise the patient. So abutment types, and also we'll start with the case selection topic today. I'll talk about how the medical conditions have an impact on the implant success or failure, and those histories are absolutely given to you in exam and they are present, and what answer you would choose if asked that whether this medical condition has an impact on the implant success and failure. So are we ready to understand these two crucial concepts in today's session? And again, in the coming sessions, I'll talk about the aged patients, how to select implants in them. I'll talk about implant failures, most important complications, maintenance of hygiene around implants. So, of course, I'll work around all those three topics that I said. Those are the major topics. Under that, I'll be talking about individual articles. So let's start, shall we? Thank you so much, Bhargavi. I'm so happy to know that you're excited about it. So I want to start with the abutment. It's a brief, very light article which will just give you an introduction to the abutment types and what kind they are, what will guide you, what will help you to choose the abutment. Why is it important to understand the knowledge? Because I don't want you to be thrown off in the exam when you see certain terms, when you see particular questions asking about the abutment selection and you go blank. As a general dentist, you would and you should understand the types based on various other factors and what particular situation demands which kind of abutment. So as you know that the questions are evolving, this understanding is extremely important. So the success of implant restoration is absolutely dependent on the various components that go into it. As I told you that the crown, whether it's screw retained or your cemented one, that also have an effect whether the implant would be successful or not, or what kind of challenges you might face with one kind of restoration versus the other. Similarly, the abutment type is extremely important in maintaining the hygiene around implant, right? So it is an important link between your implant and the restoration. And a correct selection will make sure that your implants are successful. The hygiene maintenance is easier for the patient. So different varieties are available, different terms are used. I want you with this article to be familiar with those terms, understand what situation calls for which abutment. So every case is different. Some can be a single crown, some can be a single tooth replacement thing, one can be a full arch thing, one can be a long span bridge. In all these situations, whether you're choosing a single implant, whether you're going with a long span fixed prosthesis, or you're going with an overdenture, over implants, the removable one, all on four fixed, or any kind of situations, there are different kinds of abutments which are chosen. The abutments can also vary depending upon the material that they are made of. So we'll also learn which material is chosen for what situation. It is also based on its connection type with the implant, whether it's internal connection or external connection. Then what kind of retention it uses, whether it's screw retained or cement retained, and what is the fabrication method, whether it's CAD CAM or preformed. All these kinds of different types of abutments are available. So basic concept behind it is that what is the anatomical requirement in that area, that will decide. So you have seen questions like a angled abutment. Is that right or wrong? You've seen questions with options like angled abutment. You've seen questions with terms like healing abutment. You may get questions based on provisional abutments, right? Then the tooth colored abutments. So all, even if not been asked, my idea to conduct this power session is to prepare you for what has been asked, but also at Winsport, we don't stop at 100%. We don't prepare just what has been asked or what is going to be asked. We prepare for what can possibly be the newest question on those areas. So definitely we prepare 200%. So we are going to be talking about what has been asked and also what can be asked. So we'll talk about the tooth colored abutments also, in addition to healing abutments, angle abutments. And we'll talk about the screw retained ones, and we'll talk about cemented ones and the challenges they have in maintaining hygiene around the implants, because peri-implantitis is huge in ADC. So all those requirements, that all those factors which affect what kind of abutment you will choose, can be the aesthetic requirement, the soft tissue profile, the forces and the loads on your implant and the restoration, whether it's a malpositioned implants. We have seen questions like that in exam, malpositioned implants, which are incorrectly positioned, right? Also where the adjacent tooth has been tilted. We have had questions where the bone was insufficient, either in the buccal component or in the lingual component in mandible. So angled implant may be going for that, bone augmentation where it is required, and other patient factors where ideal implant location may not be possible. What kind of choices we have, we are going to be talking about it. So implantology is basically surgical and prosthodontic. We know there is a surgical phase where you put the implant within the bone, and then there is a prosthodontic phase where you give your restoration, the final prosthesis on top of it. So both these components are asked, but for you as a general dentist, predominantly the case selection and the hygiene maintenance and identifying of the complications. That is the crucial area where the questions would be majority coming from. So all the factors on which the implant success depends is your case selection, implant placement, osseointegration, abutment selection, and maintenance. As I said, that the implant placement and osseointegration is majorly in the surgical phase, but the case selection is definitely ADC's crucial topic. Abutment selection entirely may not be, but if the wrong abutment has been chosen and it led to the problem with the hygiene maintenance, then the question can be asked that you have the knowledge or not to understand where the abutment was chosen wrong. Is that right or wrong? I want full understanding of this concept, that you may not be getting questions about initial stage of what abutment you select, but if there are hygiene maintenance challenges due to the wrong abutment selection, then that can be asked. And we have seen questions like that or not in overdenture situation, right? Where the short abutments were used and the longer abutment selection, or labially placed implants, or too deep implants in overdenture situation. I showed you all the articles in the Ultimate Advanced file. If you remember those questions, remember the overdenture situation where the hygiene maintenance around the shorter abutment was a challenge, right? So so around those situations, to tackle questions like that, is it a good thing or not to have a full understanding of all the abutment types, right? So abutment selection is extremely important. It will give you functional as well as your aesthetic assembly or success of the implant, basically. So abutment is a portion which connects to the implant, and over it, it retains your restoration. And over that, it can be either a single crown if it's a single implant that you're given, or it could be a complete metal framework which gets the full implant, which is like a full implant abutment for a prosthesis, either for a removable prosthesis or a fixed prosthesis. So sometimes you can splint multiple implants when you're giving all on four, or sometimes they can be non-splinted. So they can be individual abutments or a metal framework, a superstructure. Both can be chosen depending upon what kind of situation there are. We are not going that deep in the prosthodontic component, as I told you, but we are definitely talking about of which affect the aesthetics and which affect the functionality. That means to take up the load and to also aid in providing the oral hygiene, and for the patient also to maintain oral hygiene. So how will you select? Various factors are involved in selection of abutment types. You should have the knowledge of the factors which affect the abutment selection. So first important factor which classifies your abutment is the type of the connection. If it's an internal connection, if there is an anti-rotational component, if the abutment is located on top of the implant, the anti-rotational component is located on the top of the platform of the implant, that is your external hex. I'd like to show you the picture and image here. So if this anti-rotational component is on the top of the implant platform, that becomes your external hex. And if this anti-rotational component is within the body of the implant, then it becomes your internal hex. So abutment that goes on top of this would be an external hex kind of connection, and abutment for this internal kind of engagement with implant body would be internal hex abutment. So these are the two types, right? So implants which have the anti-rotational features within the tooth, within the body of the implant would be internal hex. So one type of implant abutment is the type of connection. So that can be either external or internal. Then the other type is based on the material, either titanium or metal alloys or ceramic ones, and the new material is the PEEK. We're talking about predominantly titanium and ceramic in this class. And ceramic one has alumina and zirconia. We'll talk about the benefits and drawback of each of them and what to choose in different situations. Then the type of retention would be either cemented or screw retained. And for your overdentures and removable partial or removable complete dentures, in the lower one or the upper one, in both maxilla and mandible, you can be giving removable overdentures. So then the abutment would be for the attachment, right? Attachment of the prosthesis. Then another categorization is temporary and permanent. So temporary ones is one which helps with the implant copings, the implant abutments, and the permanent ones. And then temporary can also be in the part of healing abutment and provisional abutment. So healing abutments is also given during the healing phase, before the final restoration. It can also be given when your gingival overgrowth is seen, as in your overdenture situation. In that case, also to help the gingiva around it heal and shrink back to its original health, you might require temporary use of healing abutment. So one was based on the connection that we just saw, internal connection and the external connection. Now based on the retention, which is very crucial, and these questions have been asked a little bit and can be asked more in depth. So let's talk about this one, the screw and the cemented one. So based on the retention, it can be either screw, cement, or an attachment. So attachment would be for your all-on-4 fixed prosthesis or your overdentures. Is that right? That is where you would use your attachment type. And your screwed and cemented ones are for your single crowns or for your short span fixed prosthesis. So when you are fabricating a cement retained restoration, it is more simpler, and that's why it would be more, uh, rather you can say it would be cheaper than your screw retained restorations. The screw retained restorations are comparatively expensive because they have additional components and lab steps. So if the cost is a factor, then definitely your cemented restorations are cheaper. In terms of aesthetics, both can deliver enhanced aesthetics, but you know that there is a top hole on the restoration to accommodate the screw, which is then covered by your direct restoration. So that is why absolutely your cement retained restoration aesthetics are more predictable versus your screw retained ones, because that hole is getting filled by a direct restorative material. Is that right? But the screw one is that allows you to give your angled or angulated abutments. So in that case, you can position your screws which are away from the aesthetic zone. But in overall comparison, your cemented restorations are more aesthetic versus your screwed restorations. Then comes your accessibility. So screw retained restorations, they are difficult to access in comparison to cement retained restorations, especially in your posterior region of oral cavity. It is easier to put the screw retained restorations in the up till the premolar area, but the more posterior the area is, putting the screws and tightening it, and in the cases where there is limited jaw opening, there also the screw retained restorations pose a challenge. Another challenge that can come with screw retained is your possibility of swallowing or aspirating, right? Now, the third factor is the occlusion. If you can imagine, if your screw retained restoration has your direct restorative material there to seal the screw hole, that means it doesn't have as much of the strength against the occlusal forces as your cement retained restoration, because that crown is entirely made of your zirconia or has that, material to withstand the forces, indirect material. Whereas the screw access holes is it is almost 50% of the occlusal table, which is covered with a restorative material, a direct restorative material to conceal the screw hole. Under the occlusal loads, your indirect crown would have more withstanding capacity versus your direct restorative material. Is that right or wrong? Everyone understands it? How your screw retained restorations versus your cemented restorations, your cemented would take the occlusal loads better, right? So under the occlusal loading, the restorative material can wear off more in your screw retained restorations. So I'm giving you these concepts because these are direct exam questions, right? In the posterior area, the limited mouth opening and where high occlusal forces, what kind of selection of the restoration would go there? Your basic cement retained would be preferred there, right? Then about the interocclusal space. When giving an abutment, a minimum of your 8 mm interocclusal space is required to achieve good retention and aesthetics. That is for your screw retained restorations, right? But your cement retained restorations require at least 4 mm height for the abutment to achieve your desirable retention. So most important area of selection is also what is the interocclusal distance available. Interocclusal distance is height from where the gingiva is till the occlusal plane of the opposing teeth in the maximal intercuspation. When the patient bites in the maximal intercuspation, can you imagine a patient biting in a maximum intercuspation and then that single tooth missing space? So that gap between the occlusal surface and occlusal plane of the opposing teeth and the gingival height, that gap is the interocclusal space for implant. Understood this definition of interocclusal space for implant? Do not confuse it with your VDO, VR, interocclusal freeway space like of that. Understood? It's different for implants and it's different for complete dentures. Clear for everybody here? The interocclusal space for implant is where the platform or the top of the implant would be. That is the gingival location. So where the gingiva ends and to the occlusal plane of the opposing arch in maximal intercuspation. I can show you and draw this also for you. Yeah. So interocclusal space of implant is that. Yeah, wait a second. So if this is your implant here, and this is your level of gingiva, right? On which you have to give your restoration. And these are adjacent teeth. So imagine the opposing jaw in the maximal intercuspation. If this is the maximal intercuspation, then this is your interocclusal space. Is it clear for everybody? Till the level of gingiva until the occlusal plane of the opposing teeth in your maximal intercuspation is the interocclusal space. Different textbooks might give you different minimum values, right? That may be required, but you can, from this article, you can imagine that 4 mm of the interocclusal space is required for the cemented type minimum, right? Right. So now based on the interocclusal space also, you will decide whether you're going with the screw retained or your cemented one. Now the other decision is the retention type. So abutments for cement retained restorations require a minimum of 4 mm of height to retain a prosthesis. And it becomes difficult in cases where the compromised interocclusal space, in that case, screw retained restorations are advantageous. So in fact, screw retained restorations require lesser interocclusal space. Based on the retrievability, cemented restorations can be used better for your provisional or definitive cementation, right? So provisionalization is better with cementation rather than screw retained. The passivity of the fit is better achieved again with the cement retained, because screws tend to create some torque and the pressure and the active load on the implant. But you should try maximum, even with your screw retained restorations, to not put a lot of force on it, the torquing force on it. Because in exam, you have seen questions like screws getting loose. So the loosened screws is also one of the important complications, which will also again make the maintenance of hygiene a challenge, right? Now, one complication which is with cemented restoration is the excess cement. So excess cement can be an issue with cement retained restoration, especially in your anterior area where the implants are specially positioned slightly on a lower side to give an emergence profile. And in that cases, the crown restoration margins are going slightly subgingival. So that can lead to create an excessive cement deposition around the implants and leading to perimucositis and periimplantitis. So in such situations where you're giving an emergence profile, a screw retained restoration would be better, because cement restoration margin will, if it follows the natural gingiva and slightly subgingival, can create excessive cemental flash, which may be difficult to remove and clean. So excess cement is usually not a problem with your screw retained restorations, right? But if your screw loosens, then you can get your granulation tissue formation, plaque accumulation, and which can lead to screw and even your porcelain fracture. Is that correct? So we have seen in exam the questions like screw loosening that even led to excessive harmful forces acting on the implant body, and hygiene maintenance around it was difficult. So periimplantitis, bone loss was seen on the radiographs. Is that correct? Have you seen questions like that? Excessive cement is a challenge with cement retained restorations, which can give you periimplantitis, right? And screw loosening is a complication associated with screw retained restorations, which can lead to restoration fracture, implant failure, periimplantitis, granulation tissue formation, right? Plaque accumulation. So to avoid problems with residual cement, screw retention can be preferred in the anterior sides, as your cement removal can become a problem when implants are placed too deep within the tissue. Is this factor clear for everybody? The complications around the cement restorations and your screw retained restorations, one is excessive cement and one is the loosening of the screw. Coming to the provisionalization, when you have long span restorations, where can you have long span restorations in implant? All on four fixed or over dentures, right? That's your long span restorations. And when you're giving your screw retained or cemented, that means we are talking about all on four fixed or long span fixed, right? Because over dentures removable do not require any kind of attachment in a screw or cement form. Those are removable, so they require attachment abutments, which can be balls or anchors or bars if it's connected. So the fixed long span restorations are your long span fixed restorations or completely all on four. In those situations, it is recommended to use screw retained restorations for easier maintenance and retrieval compared to your cement restorations, because the larger areas have larger risk and higher risk of complications. Does that make sense? So in an exam, if you're given a situation where there is all on four or a long span bridge on over the implants, then the screw retained restorations would be preferred versus the cemented. Does that make complete sense? Because retrievability is easier. Cemented one ultimately has to be sacrificed, right? The full crown has to be sacrificed. If you have put it final restoration, final cementation has been done, and any complication happens, the only way to retrieve it by sacrificing the bridge, by cutting it off. Because after cementing it, with your resin cement or your GIC cements, retrievability is difficult with cemented ones, but easier with your screw retained ones because you have to loosen the screws. Now, based on the material, titanium is the ideal implant material in regards to biocompatibility and mechanical properties. That is why even for the abutment, it is one of the ideal material. But the drawback is it gives you a metallic gray hue under your gingiva. That is why in highly aesthetic zones with high smile line and the thin gingival your topography, in those situations, you might choose your tooth colored abutments, which would be ceramic. They can be pink or white depending upon whether they're replacing or taking the space of the tooth or gingiva. So alumina or zirconia can be used. Now versus alumina and zirconia, alumina is good bioaesthetically and biocompatibility wise and aesthetics wise, but it is quite brittle and it doesn't have the strength as much as zirconia does. So if those two material are given to you and asked in the aesthetic zone what kind of material would you prefer, then zirconia has high biocompatibility, high aesthetics, and even high loading capacity. So zirconia also has better soft tissue response, the soft tissue healing around it. But zirconia is not as strong as titanium. That is why in high occlusion loading areas, you would choose your titanium, especially in posterior areas. But in anterior areas and highly aesthetic demanding areas, zirconia abutment can be chosen. Right? Now, the multi-unit abutments, as we spoke about, that when you have angulations, when your depth of implants are varying, and sometimes you have your fixed screw retained restorations of partial dentures or complete dentures, in those situations, you're using multi-unit abutments. So multi-unit abutments are indicated in your screw retained full arch prosthesis, right? They have more predictable seating and they can be more passively, and the retrievability is easier in your multi-unit abutments. Easy retrieval and replacement after any complication is the biggest benefit of a multi-unit abutment. Based on implant position also you will choose it. Angled abutments can be chosen when you have challenging situations like there is a lack of bone buccally or lingually where you cannot position your implant in an ideal location. In those situations, you would go with an angled abutment selection. So those are your custom abutments. We have seen cases like that. We have chosen answers like that. Let me remind you, Ultimate Advanced File, we have done questions like that, right? Where the angled abutment may be needed. But one thing you need to realize that every challenge cannot be handled by using an angled abutment. If there is a complete bone dehiscence, see, lack of bone, thin bone, and you're putting slightly buccally, slightly lingually can be handled. But there is an entire lack of bone in a buccal or a lingual cortex, which is a bone dehiscence. Bone dehiscence means complete loss of bone in that area. Is that right? The bone dehiscence means complete loss of bone in that area. So if there is no cortex to engage the implant 360-degree, in that case, you cannot give just your angled abutment because you require bone still to be around your implant body entirely. Those cannot be corrected. In that case, your grafts and other bone augmentation, other procedures may be required, right? And the smile line of the patient, again, if it's a high smile line, again, a aesthetically challenging area, so you would choose your zirconia abutments. So in conclusion, where there is high aesthetic demands and anatomically demanding factors or low mechanical challenges, all this would require your zirconia abutments, whereas high mechanical challenges and your less aesthetic demands, you would go with your titanium ones if material is getting asked, right? And based on your opening of the mouth, position, intraocclusal space available, retrievability, whether it's your long span, then you will choose between cement and screw. What are the complications of cement abutments? What are the complications with screw abutments? The loosening, the excess cement, that all gets covered here. So this is one basic understanding of the terms for you to start with. Is that right? I have covered and collected almost 6 to 8 articles, which I'm planning to cover with you all. Of course, one class cannot be enough for this entire in-depth discussion, but this is where we start. And I hope you got now the basic understanding of abutment selection and abutment. Because as I told you, the complete prosthodontic planning is not getting asked from you. So you don't have to get extremely detail, or you have to open your implant textbooks and go about talking about all the prosthodontic elements, the torque, how much it is needed, when, how many tight things done. Nothing. The prosthodontic phase would be done by the specialist. But you must be aware that the implant maintenance, which is your important area to be asked questions from, is dependent upon the abutment type. Is that right or wrong? Your implant maintenance phase is highly dependent upon the restoration type and the abutment type. Is that right? For that, this understanding was absolutely required. Okay? Now let's go to the patient selection criteria. So as I told you, 3 areas or 4 areas where the exam questions are coming from is the case selection, implant hygiene maintenance, abutment types, and your implant failures and complications. So let's focus on the one topic, which is your case selection. And for case selection, would you be keen to learn what medical conditions or patient-related factors can lead to the success or failure of the implant? Would you like to know all the kinds of medical history that are given to you in exam? And the question gets asked, what would be the challenge, or would this condition of the patient have an impact on the success or the failure of the implant? So are we keen to learn that? All right. So considering that you have great interest in learning about those conditions as well, let's start talking about all the patient related risk factors and how they can affect the implant success and failure, and how they should be considered when you're making a decision before creating the treatment plan once the history is provided to you. So there have been evidences which are available based on different patient related conditions. We are going to learn which condition has most important risk and which has low risk, and where there is some risk. So all those situations will be linked with your success and the risks. So there has been enough studies and researches around multiple medical conditions and challenges which have proven which can be harmful to the patient's implants. So there has been a consistent evidence around increased implant failure rate with your smokers. And there also has been an increased failure rate with the history of radiotherapy, and increased failure rate with the local bone quality and quantity. And all these have been covered and asked in the exam directly. Direct exam questions. Maxillary posterior area implant placement, smoker history implant placement, radiotherapy history implant placement. Then your bisphosphonate patients are getting asked with implant placement, right? IV bisphosphonate, oral bisphosphonate, we'll learn about that. Then osteoporotic patients, patients who have osteoporosis, female patients, whether they have risk or not. Then we have questions like whether there is a history of peri-implant disease, history of periodontitis, right? How they affect the future of the new implant. Then autoimmune disorders is something that we will learn new, but diabetes we are already getting asked. We learn about the Crohn's disease, Sjogren's disease, and other autoimmune disease, what impact they have. Then also we learn about more conditions. There is a new emerging evidence around how some patients may have genetic traits which can lead to the disruption of osteointegration. So this is an emerging area of evidence where there is a very some correlation that is coming up, that lack of osteointegration, if there has been no other history, no medical condition, no smoking, and still osteointegration is not happening, there can be an underlying genetic trait around it. So, are we keen to learn about all these conditions and their impacts and how it will affect your answer choosing in examination? Are you ready to learn how this article and how these concepts are going to help you choose the answer in the examination with confidence that whether this medical condition impacts the failure or not? So, let's start with it. There are various management protocols around the implants, which would include first take the history, conduct examination, tests, diagnosis, create your management plan, give the treatment, deliver the care, and then review and maintenance. These are your four clusters, aren't they? History taking, clinical examination, and tests, that's your information gathering component. So, any questions pertaining to implants as well, asking about the history, clinical exam, and special tests are your information gathering cluster. Diagnosis, consideration of the treatment options is your management planning. So, diagnosis and consideration of the treatment options is your DM, it's your diagnosis and management planning cluster. Then preparation of treatment plan and delivery of the treatment, and then review is your treatment and evaluation. And then maintenance, educating the patient around it, is your health promotion, professionalism and health promotion. So all sum together, and that is entire management of the patient. That is why ADC asks you all these four clusters, because this is the wholesome management, whether implant, whether perio, whether prosto, whether operative, whether oral surgery, simple extraction to any surgery. These are the basis of any patient's management. Internet. Can you all? Am I audible, guys? Can you see me? All right, perfect. So we were talking about the conditions that need to be assessed before planning the treatment, that which can lead to the implant failure, and that is why the history collecting in the patient is extremely important. So now there are a range of the conditions which can be associated with the failure of implants, and those failures can be by definition defined as early failures or late failures. And if they happen before implant loading, before giving the restoration, then it's called early failure. And if those failures happen after loading of the implant, then those are called late failures. Now we are going to talk about the conditions which are linked with these failures. So the first one is the cardiovascular disorders. Have we not commonly seen questions in the exam where there is a cardiovascular history given and the hypertension, right? Myocardial infarction history given, stroke history given. So all those histories we have seen in exam, and those patients can come and ask for the replacement of the teeth and may require you to choose accordingly whether you can indicate implants in them or not. So it's a good concept to learn around. What is the risk around the cardiovascular disorders and what are the challenges? So the surgery can be a risk in respect to the potential adverse cerebrovascular or cerebrocardiovascular events. That is why a patient who has recently suffered an infarction episode within the previous last 6 months, in those patients, you would not do implant surgery. After the 6 months period of any myocardial infarction or cardiac infarction episode, you may give implants. So the 6 month period, no surgery rule would apply here. Patients who have history of angina should have their GTN glyceryl trinitrate tablets and or the sublingual sprays available when they're undergoing implant surgery. That also needs to be in your emergency drug box as well, in your clinic as well. So angina is not an absolute contraindication, only prepare for the emergencies. No contraindication at all. History of myocardial infarction is a contraindication, absolute contraindication within the 6 months of episode. After that, not. Clear for everybody? The concept is there. I concised it for you. Learn it. Clear for everyone? Angina, no contraindication. Myocardial infarction, absolute contraindication for the first 6 months of the around the episode. Then antibiotic prophylaxis is needed for implants. It's an invasive procedure. So the cardiac conditions which require ABP, what are those conditions? We have learned those, right? Prosthetic cardiac valve, history of infective endocarditis, and your complex cyanotic congenital heart diseases. In those particular cardiological problems, ABP would be needed if you're going for implant surgery. Is that right? Clear for everybody so far? These 2 points are clear for everyone? So surgery should be avoided in diabetes situation. Again, diabetes does not lead to implant failure, but surgery should be avoided when the patient has poorly controlled diabetes. So any case, any question in the exam where HbA1c is greater than 6.9 is a poorly controlled diabetic, right? More than 7%, 7.5, 8%, 9% HbA1c, all are poorly controlled diabetes, and they would be contraindicated for surgery till their diabetic gets control. Is that correct? So poorly controlled diabetes would be a contraindication for the surgery, but not for an implant for good. Is that right? So diabetes is not linked with implant failure. There was tests and studies done, and a systematic review was formed which showed no significant difference in implant survival rates of type 2 diabetics versus non-diabetics. So concept learned here as well for the diabetics. So any history given to you in diabetes, if they ask what is the challenge, diabetes would not be a challenge for implant placement. Poorly controlled diabetes would be a challenge for the surgery at that point. Yes or no's, please? I want you to start collecting these concepts now as I'm moving ahead. So you can write them down, take notes, but these are your exam concepts directly asked in the exam based on the medical history. Autoimmune disease disorders can be given to you in the history. Crohn's disease can be given, type 1 diabetes, Sjogren's syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis. Have we seen questions around all these histories or not? Absolutely yes. So let's see the challenges. Diabetes, as I said, does not have a challenge, but there is a slightly higher risk associated if you had to be careful around one of these autoimmune diseases out of type 1 diabetes, Crohn's, Sjogren's, and rheumatoid arthritis. It's just the Crohn's disease that's linked with a slight higher failure rate, right? Patients who are undergoing systemic steroid therapy, rheumatoid arthritis patients would be going that, Crohn's disease would be also going that. These are your autoimmune diseases, right? Especially the female patients will have the side effect of osteoporosis, delayed wound healing, and increased susceptibility to infection. So when you give implants in them, you will manage around these challenges, but it is not an absolute contraindication, right? But it's not statistically relevant to lead to implant failures. Can pose some challenges, but not failures. We are here talking about where it would fail and where an intervention is absolutely needed. Osteoporosis history and the questions around whether you will give implant in osteoporotic patients or not has been asked to you. Have you seen those questions in Ultimate Advanced File? Osteoporosis patients question us what would be the challenge, and the patients has multiple histories: osteoporosis, IV bisphosphonates, diabetes. Yes or no, please. So we know her diabetes is not a problem, her osteoporosis is also not a problem, but IV bisphosphonate is a challenge because there is a link of MRONJ. So osteoporosis has been defined as a decrease in bone mass and density. And for after extended healing times, there was favorable success rates with no early failures. There was no evidence for higher failure rate in osteoporotic patients, right? So that concept is clear. Osteoporosis. So it dissolves all the confusion around when you see those questions, right? You see osteoporosis and your brain tells you one thing and then options tell you one thing. So we need to know the confident answers to those questions. Yes or no? So in exam, it takes away your time. If you are not prepared with those concepts, then you try to formulate and anticipate that yes, there is definitely weaker bone mass, weaker bone density. So it makes you think that there can be a challenge with osteointegration. And that is why these studies and these systematic reviews come handy for you to know for sure whether there is a higher failure rate associated or not. Yes or no's, please. Do we want answers in yes and no's or not to answer confidently in exam? And that is what these articles provide you. These are Australian Dental Journal articles, so absolutely legit, and you can confidently go ahead and mark an exam. Going to your bisphosphonates. Now, bisphosphonates can be oral and IV. So as you see in the table above, the IV one is linked with your higher risk of MRONJ than your oral ones, which we have covered also in the therapeutic guidelines flowchart of the MRONJ risk, which we are memorizing and reviewing and revising over and over again. So the IV bisphosphonates pose extremely higher risk. So patients requiring your implant surgery and undergoing your IV bisphosphonates, the challenge can be a potential major complication. So failure rate is not high, but MRONJ complication is higher in your IV bisphosphonates. Is that clear for everyone? These are two different concepts. Bisphosphonates and osteoporosis, not linked with the failure of implants. The complication will still be in IV bisphosphonates, but that would be of developing bronch. Clear for everyone? We have seen questions like that. Patient is osteoporotic, taking IV bisphosphonates. Question asking, what is the challenge? Diabetes, osteoporosis, or IV bisphosphonates? What would be the answer? IV bisphosphonates. What is the complication? Is it the failure or is it the bronch? Answer is, it won't lead to implant failure, but it can develop into bronch. That is a major complication, right? The risk of developing bronch is low, but if it happens, it's quite severe. The nature of that complication is quite severe. Is that correct? Is that right? So is it an absolute contraindication? No. But would you plan that surgery without involving the medical specialist and planning when around your IV bisphosphonate doses? No. An absolutely multidisciplinary approach would be needed. A multidisciplinary team would be needed to give implant in a bronch in your IV bisphosphonate taking patient. And if that patient is living in a residential facility, has other dementia or other problems, then it keeps layering on and gives you auxiliary challenges. Is that correct? The discontinuation of the bisphosphonate therapy should not be made by the dental practitioner, but should be by your prescribing physician in consultation with your dental team. The patient should be made aware of the risks and benefits of discontinuing their medication. If they are taking it for osteoporosis, there is a risk of your pathological fractures. If they're taking it for cancers, there is risk of the metastatic spread of the carcinomas or cancers if any therapy is stopped. So that is why the call lies with the physician whether it can be stopped or not. So whether the implants will be given or not for this group of patients, a complete counseling and complete understanding of the risks and consequences should be established and then decision made. Is that correct? So any of these questions with these histories comes, you know you cannot have a direct answer and the consultation with so many specialists would be needed. Considering the radiotherapy history poses a higher risk of failure, especially when the radiation dose was greater than 50 grays. Would you remember this one? There has been histories given to you in exam where the radiation dose has been mentioned as well. Is that right? 60 grays questions, 50 grays questions. We have seen those radiotherapy doses in the examination questions. So please know that any area, any bone irradiated before with more than 50 gray radiation dose, there is a 2 to 3 times greater failure rate, right? So any patient with that history, in those cases, you can say implant is contraindicated, failure rate is 2 to 3 times higher. Then periodontitis related tooth loss is also another strongly evidenced linked with your implant failures, where there is a risk of peri-implant disease and your history of periodontitis leading to implant failure. Longer term studies have showed increased in probing depths, peri-implant bone loss, and incidence of peri-implantitis in the patients who had history of periodontitis before. So patients with a history of periodontitis were at the greater risk of peri-implant disease. We have seen questions like that also in where there is no medical history, but there has been previous periodontitis, teeth loss due to periodontitis. There we have chosen the risk factor in this patient is the history of periodontitis. Is that right or wrong? Done these questions, direct examination questions here for you guys. Smoking, Is that also a very important factor in the history provided to you? Yes. So smoking is linked with the implant failure, right? Success rate for non-smokers is 91%, and in smokers, the success rate is 80%. Again, an absolute contraindication? No. These are the risk factors for the failures. So smoking affects your implant by carbon monoxide release, and then your nicotine effect, direct cytotoxic effects, and wound healing effects. Most failures would, if associated with smoking, would happen in the first year following implant placement. Absolutely question concept. When do you see major implant failures in smokers? The first year following implant placement. Memorize it. There were twice as many implant failures in the maxilla compared to the mandible. So does the smoker's implant failures has a predilection for the jaw? Again, an absolute exam concept. Yes. Smokers are also has a predilection for the jaw, maxilla failing more than mandible. How can you reduce the risk of implant failures in smokers? By asking the patient to reduce smoking and stop smoking at least 1 week before implant surgery. Clear for everyone? Absolute exam concept. The minimum requirement to reduce the implant failure rates is by stopping the smoking at least 1 week before implant surgery. All smokers were encouraged to stop smoking completely 1 week before implant placement, and that has reduced their failure rate statistically, right? Smokers who did not stop had a statistically significant higher failure rate, which is 38.46. 1 week sedation protocol was chosen from a medical model suggesting that significant blood flow improvement happens within 1 week, right? So when this studies was done, there was a difference of 38% failure rate in those who stopped and those who don't stop. Smoking has been associated with reduction in bone density, particularly in maxilla. That is why higher failure rates in smokers are associated with maxillary implants. Exam concept. Will you memorize it, guys? So overall implant failure was more in your maxilla than in your mandible, and more in posterior maxilla than in anterior maxilla, more in posterior mandible than in anterior mandible. These are already asked in the exams. Female patient coming to you talking and comparing about her friend who got implants in anterior maxilla. She wants in posterior maxilla. What would you tell her about the success rates? Of course, they would vary. Posterior maxilla is more linked with failures than your anterior maxilla. It's more in posterior and less. Failures in posterior maxilla were higher than anterior, and posterior mandible higher failure rate than anterior rear. So it's less or higher in posterior rear? Yes, success is less, but failure rates are higher, right? All right. Now the local anatomy that can also have a challenges is your nasal floor, closeness, nasopalatine canal, maxillary sinus, and in mandible, it could be close to mental nerve, inferior alveolar nerve. Any concavities which are present lingually in the posterior mandible region can also lead to perforations. So those are your anatomical challenges, right? Then trauma to any sublingual or submental artery specifically is linked with significant bleeding, swelling, and in some life-threatening situations. So these are your anatomical challenges in patients, right? So all those long-term studies have indicated that hypertension and cardiovascular patients, if they can undergo the surgery, there is no risk of implant failure. only for the first 6 months around myocardial infarction, you will not do the surgery. Then there is an inconclusive evidence that the diabetic patients have a higher failure rate. So inconclusive means we can put it in the low risk. One long-term study has shown higher relative risk, and uncontrolled diabetic patients should not be treated. So that means do not go with implant surgery in uncontrolled diabetic patients. That would be a contraindication. But is it an absolute contraindication? No, because you can control the diabetes, right? You can reduce the glycemic index, you can reduce the HbA1c. Is that correct? So it is only relatively contraindicated till it converts to a controlled diabetes situation. So far, so good. Is everyone with me? Now, there has been a study which has reported osteoporosis. Both long-term and short-term were discussed and studied. And there has been just extending healing times, but not significant failures. Bisphosphonate therapy guidance is needed. You require expert opinions when you have bisphosphonate histories. Incidence of MRONJ is low, but when it happens, it would be highly morbid. That means extremely severe. Clear for everyone? The risk of MRONJ may be low, but if it happens, it would be clearly very severe. That's why the expert opinion is absolutely needed. Evidence of radiotherapy, especially above 50 grays, is a significant risk factor. And hyperbaric oxygen using to reduce the implant failure, the link is not in the evidence is not enough that if you can use hyperbaric oxygen and that will reduce the risk of implant failure, there is inconclusive results around that. So definitely in 50 gray and above radiotherapy, the risk is extremely high. There is a weak evidence, but still an evidence which connects the history of periodontitis related tooth loss associated with increased peri-implantitis. And there is a higher quality evidence which supports higher failure rates in smokers. And smokers also have predilection for more failure in maxilla versus your mandible. And also when you have done any bone augmentation, bone grafting, and a patient is smoker, then also there are higher risk. Now, remember the question we have done in Ultimate Advanced File where the patient was smoker and we did the bone grafting. So what would be the challenge? Whether there was a graft rejection, whether there was smoking. So this is one crucial concept to learn here. When you have done bone grafting and there's history of smoking, that in combination leads to higher failure rates. Makes full sense? Absolute exam concept here. Yes or no's, please? So that would be it. And then there is also higher failure rate, which is with the poor bone quality, which is more in maxilla than mandible, more in posterior than anterior. And there is some evidence which is correlating your genetic traits and a failure for osteointegration. But those links are still not very clear. More data and, of course, more studies are required. I'm going to share that millimeter required interocclusal for cemented and screw. I don't agree with the one given in this article that was not very clear. So I'll give you the reference for that. So if you are on my public WhatsApp public group for the mocks, I would be sharing the reference there for the candidates who are not enrolled. And for my candidates also, I'll share it on our internal group. But I'm going to share the reference for interocclusal space required for screwed abutments as well as your implant cement retained restorations. My public mock group WhatsApp link, if my team is here, I would request you to share the link. Otherwise, please check our Facebook group and Facebook page. We post our free WhatsApp group links there. I will make the team to post the links there. You can join the group and I will be providing the references there, right? All right, so thank you so much. That would be it. Thank you guys. And we'll meet again, but I will take the next part of the implant session, but it may be next week, it may maybe in another few weeks, because I have been getting some requests around the ADC procedure and the ADC processes. So my next Monday public class can be around that as well. In few days, I will be announcing on my Facebook group what is the topic of the next public session, whether it would be around the ADC process or implants. But I've been getting some questions around how much time is needed, because there are a lot of students who want to start getting into the course now, and they are confused whether this available time would be enough for them, or should they aim for the September examination. So I'm going to be talking about those factors as well. And then, of course, after that class, we will get back to the next power sessions. Then a public mock is also coming, a free mock is also coming. So we will be meeting one Monday for our mock discussion. So lots of things are coming up, exciting things are coming up. Stay tuned. Please join our Facebook groups and follow our Facebook page, so you are, updated with what's coming every week. And any more questions, you can feel free to message me. My number's all there on my Facebook page and groups. Please join the page and the groups to stay updated, and join our WhatsApp public group for the mocks details as well. And in those groups, I'll share today's reference also for the interocclusal space. Thank you so much, guys, and have a fabulous week ahead. Happy studying, and I'll see you soon next week.